There's a question that lives quietly in the back of a lot of brilliant minds, and almost nobody says it out loud.
Am I actually good at any of this?
Or have I just been getting away with it for a really long time? If that sentence made your stomach drop a little, keep watching. Because for a multi-passionate mind, this question doesn't just visit. It moves in. You can have a wall of evidence that you're capable. Real projects. Real wins. People who respect your work. And the moment you sit alone with yourself, none of it counts. You look at your life and see a string of things you got pretty good at, and you wonder, with this quiet, sickening certainty, whether you've just been doing an elaborate impression of a competent person for 30 years.
You read about imposter syndrome, and it almost fits, but not exactly.
Imposter syndrome is supposed to be the feeling of being underqualified in one specific field. Yours is different. Yours is the feeling that you don't really belong in any of the fields you've touched. You weren't a real coder, you just learned enough to ship things. You weren't a real writer, you just figured out how to make sentences work. You weren't a real anything. You were a guest in every room the whole time. And one day, surely someone will check the guest list and realize you were never on it. I'm going to give you something different than the usual imposter syndrome video. The standard pep talk says, of course you're qualified, look at all your accomplishments. That advice doesn't land for you, and there's an actual reason it doesn't. And once you see the reason, the whole feeling reorganizes itself. What's happening to you is not imposter syndrome. It is a very specific cognitive trap that almost only happens to minds wired the way yours is. It has a measurable mechanism. The same research that exposed why incompetent people overestimate themselves quietly explains why people like you systematically underestimate yourselves. Today, I'm going to show you that mechanism, walk you through the 4 specific reasons polymath minds feel like frauds at things they are genuinely good at, and give you a real framework for finally trusting your own competence without lying to yourself. Stick around for the 3rd reason. It's the one almost nobody names, and it's the one that explains why even your biggest wins feel like accidents. If you've ever quietly suspected you've been pulling off the longest con of your life, you're with people who get it. Subscribe and let's go. Let's start with a piece of research everyone has heard of, but almost nobody finishes hearing about. In 1999, 2 Cornell psychologists, David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger, published the now famous study showing that people who are bad at a skill tend to wildly overestimate how good they are at it. That part of the finding became a meme. You've seen the curve. You've laughed at the people stuck on the peak of knows almost nothing, thinks they know everything. But the original paper had a second half, and the second half is the part you need. The same study found the opposite pattern at the top of the curve. People who were genuinely high performers, the people in the highest competence quartile, consistently underestimated their own ability. They assumed the tasks they found easy must be easy for everyone. They saw in fine detail all the complexity they hadn't yet mastered. They knew enough about the field to know how much more there was to know, and so they rated themselves lower than they actually were. Read that again, because this is the trap. The same metacognitive skill that lets you recognize competence in others, the awareness of nuance, the sense of what you don't yet know, is the skill that quietly makes you doubt your own. The people who feel most like frauds are often the ones who know enough to see the depth of the field they're standing in. The people who feel most confident are often the ones who can't yet see the depth at all. Now layer your specific kind of mind on top of this. A polymath mind has done this not in one field, but in many. Every domain you've entered, you've gone in far enough to see the cathedral of what you don't yet know inside it. You've stood in 12 different cathedrals and felt small in every single one.
The specialist gets to feel small in one.
You feel small in 12. And then you call yourself a fraud, because surely a real anything would feel big in at least one of them. You aren't a fraud. You're just running the high performer underestimation pattern across multiple domains at the same time. And nobody, until now, has named that for you clearly. The first reason this trap hits you so hard is mathematical. You don't have one field of comparison. You have many. And in each one, you're stacking yourself against people who have spent their entire professional lives in that one field. The coder you compare yourself to has been coding for 15 years and nothing else. The writer you compare yourself to has been writing for 20 years and nothing else. The designer you compare yourself to has been designing for 10 years and nothing else. You're not lesser than these people. You're just doing a different kind of math. They went deep on one. You went meaningful on 5. And then you compare your level in each one against their level in that one and conclude you're behind in everything. You're not behind. You're playing a different game. And the score you're using to judge yourself doesn't measure the thing you're actually playing for. A specialist's value is in their depth. Your value is in the combination. But the combination is invisible to you because you can only see one field at a time when you compare. The thing that makes you rare is the very thing this comparison hides. Here is something almost nobody understands about competence, and it's especially true for a connection-driven mind. When you finally solve something, you can usually trace back exactly how you got there. The conversation that gave you the idea, the book that planted the seed, the detour from another field that turned out to be the missing piece. Because your mind weaves across fields, your wins almost always have a visible trail of imports from somewhere else. And that trail makes the wind feel borrowed. A specialist's win feels earned because it came from their one field. Yours feels accidental because the path went through 6. Read that one more time. Your wins don't feel like accomplishments because you can see the seams. You watched yourself stitch the parts together, and that stitching feels suspiciously like cheating. As if a real expert wouldn't have needed to import anything from elsewhere. As if the value lives in solving it from inside one field, the way a specialist would. This is exactly backward, and it might be the most important reframe in this video. The stitching across fields is the value. Specialists can't do what you just did because they don't have the imports. The seams you're embarrassed about are the actual signature of your kind of work. The fact that you can see how you got there doesn't make the destination smaller. It makes the route uniquely yours. This is the one almost nobody names, and it's the deepest cut. When a specialist evaluates themselves, they have one reference point, who they actually are in their field. You have something far more painful. You have a ghost in every field you've ever touched. The version of you who, if you just committed and gone deep, could have become world-class at that one thing. And every time you assess yourself, you're not just measuring yourself against the people in the room. You're measuring yourself against 12 hypothetical versions of yourself who specialized in 12 different things. The hypothetical specialist you is always better than the actual polymath you in any given field because the hypothetical one had all of your hours and put them into one place. So in every field, you fall short, not against the people who were actually there, but against the ghost of who you could have been if you'd stayed. This is a mathematically rigged game. There is no possible reality in which you outperform a hypothetical version of yourself who spent 10 times the hours on the same thing. So you walk through life feeling perpetually almost but not quite in every domain against a competitor who doesn't exist and never could. Once you see this trap, you can finally step out of it. You are not competing with the specialized ghost. The specialized ghost would have been a different person, with a different mind, without your imports, without your connections, without your range. You don't get to have all your range and also have one specialist's depth. Nobody gets both. The trade was real, and it was the right trade for the kind of mind you actually have. The ghost was never the better version. It was just a different one. And you would have been just as haunted by the ghost of the polymath you could have been if you'd specialized. The fourth is structural, not psychological, and it matters more than it sounds. Every traditional field gives its members a ladder: junior, mid-level, senior, lead, principal, master. Each rung has a name, a set of criteria, recognized signals of arrival. When you climb in a single field, you can feel yourself moving up because the architecture of that field tells you so. Polymath work has no such ladder. There is no rung labeled, "You have officially become a real cross-domain synthesizer." There is no credential that confirms you've arrived. There is no peer group that gathers to certify your level. So you can do extraordinary work year after year and never receive the institutional signal that says, yes, you are now a real one. You aren't imagining the absence. The ladder isn't hidden. It doesn't exist. And in the absence of external validation, the mind tends to fill the void with a quiet default verdict, which is almost always probably not real yet. Specialists feel real because the field told them they are. You have to feel real without being told. This is hard, and it's worth naming. The lack of a recognized ladder isn't proof that polymath work isn't real work. It's proof that the institutions are still catching up to a kind of value they didn't historically have to measure. You are working in a field that doesn't yet have its own diplomas. That's not your failure. That's a gap in the world. Here are 4 moves that actually help. The first is to stop running per field comparisons and start running per project comparisons. Don't ask, am I as good a writer as a writer? Could a specialist have produced this specific piece of work on this specific project with the imports I brought to it? The honest answer is usually no, not because you outclassed them in their domain, but because the project needed exactly the cross-domain stitching that they wouldn't have brought. The win was real. It was just yours shaped. The second is to learn to read the seams as a signature, not a defect. Every time you notice the trail of imports in your work, the way one field's idea solved another field's problem, pause and recognize that as the actual product. Not the thing you cobbled together despite, the thing you produced because. The visible cross-field stitching is the mark of your hand. Specialists don't leave that mark because they don't have the imports. You do because you do. Stop hiding the seams. They're your signature. The third, and this is the one that does the most work, is to retire the specialist ghosts. Catch yourself when you're comparing yourself to the version of you who could have been the world-class one thing. Notice it, and then put the ghost down. You didn't fail to become that person. You chose day after day to become something else, and the something else is the thing you are. The ghost cost you nothing in real life. It just steals the joy of what you actually built. Let it go. The fourth is to build your own private ladder. Since the institutions haven't built one for cross-domain work, you have to build it for yourself. Pick a small set of personal markers that mean something to you, that are not borrowed from any one field's hierarchy. The complexity of problems you can hold. The number of fields you can connect with real fluency. The quality of the work people you respect ask you to do. Track those over time. Not every year. Every 5. You will be astonished at the distance. The reason you don't feel it is that you haven't been marking the trail. Before I close, the honest line again. If what you're feeling has moved past intellectual self-doubt and into the deeper kind, the persistent conviction that you don't matter, that your work has no value, that nothing you do will ever be enough, that's not a productivity problem, and it isn't an imposter problem. That's a place to talk to a therapist, gently. The framework in this video is for the cognitive trap. The deeper feeling deserves real support, and asking for it is part of being honest with yourself. So let me leave you here. The reason you feel like a fraud at all of it is not that you are one. It's that the very mind that lets you do cross-domain work is also the mind that lets you see in fine detail the depth of every field you walk into. You are running the highest performer self-assessment pattern across more domains than the human ego was ever built to handle. Of course it feels like fraud. The math of your self-image was rigged against you from the start. But the work is real. The connections are real. The wins are yours. The seams are your signature, not your evidence. And the absence of a ladder doesn't mean you haven't been climbing. It just means you've been climbing in a country that hasn't built ladders yet. You don't need permission to call yourself the thing you've been the whole time. You don't need a diploma or a peer review or a title to validate a kind of work the world is only now learning to measure. You just need to stop using a specialist's ruler to measure a polymath's mind and stop racing against ghosts that were never real. Stop being the fraud you think you are. Start being the real you actually already are. If this hits something honest in you, if you finally feel a little less like a guest in your own life, subscribe and join a community of people learning to trust the work they've actually been doing all along. And I want to know in the comments, what is one win in your life that you've been quietly dismissing as luck or accident, that after watching this, you might be ready to credit yourself for? Drop it below. The people here will see you. Thanks for watching. Now go put down the ghosts and own what you built.